While the makers of games like Resident Evil and Alone in the Dark have spent the last few years trying to make their classic games look as modern as possible, there's been a concerted effort by the indie community to take the survival horror genre back to the low polygon look of the 32-bit era. Greek Tragedy is the latest example, giving fans of the old school traditional tank controls, obtuse puzzles, and an evil villain that everybody hates: frat boys. But is that all you need to make a great survival horror game? Well, that's what we're about to find out when I review Greek Tragedy by first-time developer Cute Spooks. I'll say this about Greek Tragedy: at least it doesn't take place in a musty old mansion. Instead, this is a survival horror game that takes place on the campus of South Michigan University, where Amy Chipley is hard at work on writing a story about a young girl who's being stalked by a wolf man. Little does she know that life is about to imitate art as she gets an urgent call from her boyfriend Kurt, who seems to be getting kidnapped. To make matters worse, Amy's being hunted by a group of students who wear long black robes and carry these big knives. Equipped with little more than a taser, it's up to Amy to escape certain death and save Kurt, all while solving the mystery of why she's being targeted. Like I said at the top, this is an old school survival horror game in the style of the first few Resident Evil games. This includes fixed camera angles, limited saves, and of course, old school tank controls. It's also the kind of throwback horror game that is all about solving complicated multi-part puzzles, all while a scary guy in a robe tries to track you down at the university. What the game does well is it creates a tense atmosphere that is filled with dread. The game uses the dark lighting and low polygon graphics to really set the mood, and there's some fun and creative camera shots that ratchet up the suspense. This is especially true early on, when everything is still shrouded in mystery. You can tell the developers had a lot of fun finding the most dramatic camera angle for any given shot, and all that really worked for me in the first half of the game. Now, while the survival horror is certainly front and center, you'll quickly discover that Greek Tragedy is really a series of spooky moments separated by a bunch of obtuse puzzles. You'll need to pick up a key that'll unlock the paper, that'll generate a password, that'll open up a door where you'll find a pen, and, well, you get the point. There's always something to pick up and use to solve a puzzle to advance. Sometimes that puzzle is just a series of riddles, while other times the puzzle is nothing more than a series of fetch quests. It's all very old school stuff. And that's the thing about this game: it's directly inspired by survival horror games from 30 years ago. No matter what criticism I have of the game, I have a hunch that there are going to be a lot of fans, and maybe even the developer, who argues that it's meant to be like that. This is, after all, a throwback to the days when developers were still testing the waters when it came to not only constructing horror, but also having the characters simply exist in a three-dimensional world. What, you don't like tank controls? Well, that's too bad, because it's supposed to be like that. Frustrated by the unhelpful camera angle? Well, that's how things were in the 32-bit era. What do you wish you could save more frequently? Well, that wouldn't be in the spirit of those old games. And who knows, maybe there's some truth to that, but I still think there's some room to criticize. For example, the tank controls are a lot more squirrely in Greek Tragedy, and Resident Evil rarely forced players to walk on narrow beams. And look, I'm not even one of those people who necessarily complains about tank controls, but there's just something a little bit off about the way this game plays. It's especially bad when you're trying to avoid those robed villains who apparently have knives so long that they can do major damage from across the room. And it's not just walking around that's a pain, but also the combat. Early on, Amy's given a taser with 5 shots that can be replenished at the checkpoints around campus. For the most part, you're going to use this to temporarily stun the cult members, but there are a few times when you're going to need to take out a flying drone with a bunch of shots. And when I say a bunch, I mean it. These little suckers are a taser sponge. There's an especially frustrating bit towards the end where you have to fight 4 of them all at once, all in a space with no health items. The whole interaction really left me wanting to quit the game and play something better. I would also argue that the save system in this game is a lot more restrictive, especially when compared to those early survival horror games. Sure, you were restricted to a certain amount of saves in those first few Resident Evil games. But there was always more than enough ink scattered around the levels, allowing you to save before most of the big events. However, that is not the case when it comes to Greek Tragedy. Each of the save points can only be used once, which means that you'll often save right when you get to a new area and then have to solve a bunch of puzzles before you can move on and save again. There were a number of times when I lost 20 or maybe even 30 minutes worth of progress, and it was always because one of those robed slashers would show up without warning. You know, it's one thing to be left frustrated, but quite another to just be annoyed with the game. I gotta admit, there were multiple times when I almost stopped playing. Not because I found the game too challenging, but rather because I was replaying too much of the game every single time I died from some cheap attack that I simply couldn't avoid. It felt like a little piece of me died every time I had to reload, and there were multiple times when I wondered if the payoff was even going to be worth it. And as somebody who stuck with it long enough to see the multiple endings, I can tell you right now that Greek Tragedy is not worth it. Yeah, the setting and mood might be suspenseful, but the game is frustrating and nowhere near as much fun as those classic horror games that it's trying to emulate. Look, I applaud the effort, but they weren't kidding around when they called this a tragedy. Greek Tragedy is a throwback survival horror game in the spirit of Resident Evil and Alone in the Dark. While the university setting is a nice change of pace from the typical scary mansion, all of the other trappings are still here, both in good and bad ways. Expect tank control, annoying enemies, dumb puzzles, and plot twists that you're gonna see coming a mile away. The genuinely good moments are ruined by frustrating combat and save points that are so far apart that you're going to lose 20 minutes of progress every time you die. I have a hunch that a lot of people are going to give up on Greek Tragedy halfway through. And the sad thing is, I don't blame them. Hey, thanks for watching my review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. Where is the scariest place to be trapped? Well, survival horror games have trapped you in mansions and hospitals and universities and more. But where do you think is the scariest place to be trapped? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back next week with a review of Desert Race Adventure. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.